Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, some quick instructions. Please keep your mics on mute and keep your video switched off. If you have questions or comments, just add them to the chat box and we will pick them up towards the end of the session. And for those of you who have joined us on Facebook, you can add in your questions in the comments also and we'll pick them up towards the end of the session. So welcome everybody, thank you, and it's nice to see such a good turnout here today. Publics at IIHS is a series of lectures and seminars where we invite researchers and practitioners to come and talk about their work at IIHS. And keeping with times, we have decided to take the series online and starting this month. And we're extremely pleased to have Anant Kamath here with us today to talk about his latest book, which is called The Social Context of Technological Experiences in India. Welcome, Anant, and thank you so much for being here, and big congratulations to you on your book. We are also joined by Aditi Suri, who is consultant here at IIHS and faculty. And Aditi studies digital platforms in cities and particularly how technology will change city economies and change the nature of work. And thank you, Aditi, for being here. And Aditi will be moderating today's session, and she'll also be discussing Anand's book with him today. So, so over to you, Aditi. I will ask you to introduce today's speaker and then get the session started.
Thank you, Tanvi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good evening, and hi to Anant as well. Welcome to this evening's Publics at IIHS. I'm very excited to be hosting this live with Anant today. I'm going to begin by giving everyone a bit of an introduction to Anant and his work. Anant is a social scientist, and he will soon be beginning his term at the National Institute for Advanced Studies. So congratulations on that, Anant. And you'll be close to IIHS soon. He's taught development, social research, and technological change before this at Azim Premji University. He was previously a scholar at the United Nations University, again focusing on technology. Previously then at the Center for Development Studies and the Madras School of Economics. So his research interests are in the economic sociology of technological change and experiences and in the political economy of development. And I've had the good fortune of being able to read parts of Anand's new book, The Social Context of Technological Experiences in India, which came out in May of this year in the middle of the pandemic. The book centers around rich accounts of the life worlds and contexts that form the context for how people interact with technology. And the kind of technologies that form the empirical basis of Anand's book are artifacts like mobile phones and biometric technologies, and also programs and technologies that offer to increase the market presence for certain traditional professions. And I find this mix of technology studied very interesting for how ubiquitous they are. Even outside of the pandemic context, the dependence on mobile technology to find work or to upskill traditional professions through digital means or technology-based initiatives to increase market linkages has been a very important part of the way our national development story has kind of played out, and right down to the various government initiatives that have encouraged these. And so I think all of us who are listening in today have different ways of coming and different anecdotes at understanding how the digital other uses mobile phones, be it the service staff in our offices or homes, Uber drivers, or street vendors who are suddenly forced to use digital payments because of either demonetization or the pandemic. And for this, I emphasize for us to listen to the kind of communities that Anand has chosen to study and speak to, because I think one of the biggest takeaways from Anand's book is in learning what exactly a technological outcome is. What kind of questions do we need to ask to determine whether the mobile phone revolution has paid dividends to all different kinds of communities that exist in India and all of those who are not always very equal to each other. So learning to witness and analyze what a technological outcome is really important for the kind of public opinion we have. And this is the stuff that goes into how we view market changes or how we vote based on economic reforms around technology. And I think the COVID pandemic has forced all sorts of people, all sorts of voters to be in the path of technology quite abruptly and expecting them to learn quite quickly and adapt and forcing them to fit into certain kinds of systems. Um, and given our dependence on digital technology, either for work, education, retail, communication, or leisure, I think these roles around technology is going to be even stronger. And it's, I think, our responsibility as citizens to ask these kind of questions. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to ask Anant to take us through his work. And I ask all of us listening in to note, what our assumptions around technology are and what its place in the developing nation is. So Anant will speak, and then I'll have a chance to ask him some questions before we open up the discussion to the audience here on Zoom and those listening in on Facebook. And as Tanvi said in the beginning, please use the chat box in both Facebook and Zoom for your questions, and we'll pose them to Anand. So Anand, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Aditi, for your very articulate introduction. I must thank Aditi for agreeing to moderate and discuss this. And of course, thanks to the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, IIHS, which kindly and graciously agreed to host my book talk. This is actually my second book on the theme of the economic sociology of technological change. This book was released, the book that we're going to talk about today, released about 2 months ago. The global edition released about 2 months ago, bang in the middle of everything. And I must actually start off with three unfortunate pieces of news. Firstly, I haven't seen the book myself. The book hasn't reached me yet because of severe delays all over the world, very understandable delays. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that the South Asian edition, which is suited to the Indian market, which is what you see in the poster here, the South Asian edition is not for sale yet. And if there was anything worse, the UK edition, the global edition, listed on Amazon, has no stocks. So the book is not with me. The South Asian edition is not for sale yet, and there are no stocks of the UK edition. So the book isn't there, but I can assure you that it is very much there. So this is not some talk about some Benami book. This is, I hope this will release very soon. I'm going to speak about the ideas in this book and what this book talks about in about 35 minutes, I should say. So let me go straight into what this book says. So the book demonstrates how technology and society shape one another, and that there are intrinsic connections between social processes and technological experiences. Technology is not only about strides in science and engineering, but it's also about political and sociological forces around us. That is, technological processes or technological outcomes are actually embedded in sociological processes, and they depend on the way that things like gender and caste are constructed and how these things operate. In popular understanding and in policy understanding also, unfortunately, technological change is assumed to immediately and automatically bring in progress and development that ripples through society and economy in waves of creative destruction. Technology is usually deemed as the indisputable juggernaut of our contemporary era, advancing in majesty with bureaucrat and technocrat like a propeller and a rudder, flattering anything archaic or unworthy in its path. Entirely unaccounted for all this are any of the social variables that might shape technological progress. This, unfortunately, is a mirror image of our much wider attitude around technology and development. So in this book, I dethrone grand views of technology steering development and quick fix technological solutions to development. And in this book, I make, I take off the slavish role that society and development have to technology. In here, I embrace a view of the relationship between technology and society, not as a linear cause-effect relationship between technology and society, but as a harmony of these two restless forces. I urge in this book for you to take a relook at popular notions such as knowledge economy or information society, and I provoke the idea that the dividends from our supposedly contemporary technological era are nothing but actually quick fix solutions masquerading as progressive ideals. I ask to expand the question, what technologies do people encounter, to include the angle of what kind of people do technologies encounter. This means that we cannot so easily design technological interventions into solving development issues without expanding and deepening our understanding of how technology works and probably even what technology is. Back at the institution where I was, my past institution, Azim Premji University, I used to do this little exercise in my classes, my technology classes. I used to ask students to close their eyes for 2 seconds and nothing more. I used to ask them to close their eyes and think of what the word technology brings to their mind and what technology worker or technology sector brings to their mind. Try it yourself and immediately you'll see that you have visions of high sophistication digital technologies, spotless work environment, white collar English speaking male workers, basically a synonym of what is modern. This sort of an understanding makes technology have some sort of a naturalized or autonomous power to propel change by itself. In policy and popular conversations, technology is seen to be some sort of a neutral and a liberator and an annihilator. This is actually, a hangover of the search for political and industrial order back in the Anglo-American world, back in the Industrial Revolution, where they placed enormous trust on technological change to set things straight in an otherwise chaotic and dangerous world. Karl Marx said that the railways would annihilate caste in India. The governors general Dalhousie and William Bentinck said the same thing about telegraph. Telegraph will get rid of caste in India. The same thing was spoken of by the steam engine in industrial society in Britain. Mulk Raj Anand, pretty well-known writer, pretty celebrated writer, wrote of a character, a manual scavenger, in one of his pieces of writing. This manual scavenger sees a flush toilet for the first time and exclaims, "Yes, we are now free." We know all too well what's the relationship between toilets and caste today. It's alive and kicking today. Of course, this is not to criticize Mulk Raj Anand, but he brought this very interesting feature of how we just think that technology will bring about social change and development. Do we think that medieval technology brought about feudalism? Do we think that industrial technology brought about capitalism? Do we think that electrification brought about socialism? We don't. Then how much more can we think that digital technology or high technology will also bring about things? All this is called technological determinism. That is the mindset and the policy paradigm that technology determines practically. I mean, I'm playing on the word. Technology determines everything in front of it and everything around it. An offspring of technological determinism is technological solutionism, which brings with it the mindset that technology holds the self-determined potential to ameliorate the human condition. Both technological determinism and technological solutionism overlook the social foundations of technology and severely overlook the need for different angles of inquiry to understand how technology actually works in development. Now, if I say that, if I tell you that, when I speak like this, it almost seems that, it doesn't seem so likely that people think this way or that policymakers think this way. Unfortunately, it's all too true. The undercurrents of this sort of technology determinism and the disregard for technology and society interactions are practically everywhere. The private corporate sector, public discourses, technocrats, the state media, everywhere. So in this book, what I do in the beginning is I round up some suspects in the same way that it is done in real life. I round up those suspects who I think are guilty of feeding into this technological determinism in mind. That is, to feed in the idea that technology is the juggernaut that pushes things ahead. Here's suspect number one. It's a usual suspect: policy. India has had a spotty record of creating deep, visionary, and pragmatic policies of science and technology, despite the rhetoric around the role of technology and development, which has only been rising. There have been a series of well-intentioned documents: the technology policy statements, the science technology innovation policies, the sectoral policy documents, the National Digital Literacy Mission, Digital India, National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence. So many policies and so many such documents created by groups of highly accomplished individuals and esteemed organizations and institutions. The intensity and flavor of the role of technology in development also is seen very strongly in the 5-year plans, and it increases decade after decade, reaching a high plateau in the 1990s. My argument here with this suspect policy is that the honorable intention of these policies may never really see the light of day in the broader inclusive sense of development, because they set their ambitions and overlook the gigantic jumble of socioeconomic realities that India actually is. I don't allege that these programs are in denial of obstacles in their path. Of course, they understand there are obstacles in their path, but the obstacles that are confessed within these documents, within these policies, are mostly technical obstacles or mainstream economic obstacles, and they completely fail to observe that it is possible and certain for technologies and technology missions to stand neck deep and stuck in the dense sociological reality that India is. That's about policy. Here's an unusual suspect, which has fed into this technological determinism. The unusual suspect that has fed into the idea that technology is the driver is the state-curated films. Now, in an era long before single-channel, state-controlled Doordarshan, these state-curated films served as sort of in-house documentaries showing the state of economy and society and the central role of technological progress in this. Probably influenced by some Soviet antics of state propaganda through motion pictures, these films showcase vignettes of some of the thrilling achievements of economic progress soon after the 1950s. And allegedly, this progress happened because of thrusts in big technology, there is a grain of truth in that. But some of them even went as far as to provide evidence of a certain tenor of scientific temper permeating through society. Let me give you a list of titles of these films. They're very interesting. A Village Smiles, Build Machines, Build India, Saga of Progress, Our Industrial Age, Electricity in the Service of Man, Destination Technology, so on. Watch them, they're all free on YouTube. They're free to watch. Some of the narrations in the films are also interesting. Let me quote some of them. Why only industry and agriculture? The detrimental effects of even demographic epidemics like overpopulation can be overcome by one combination: technology and speed. Speed and technology are the only answers. Electric power is the open sesame to a more pleasant and prosperous life. All it requires is a flick of a switch. The new temples of modern India fight to dispel the darkness which stand in testimony like the exalted Sun Temple at Konark. These films are wonderful. Do watch them. They're quite amusing when we see them in retrospect, but at the same time, they feed into the technology determinism mindset. Here is my other unusual suspect. If you grew up in the 1990s or you grew up in the early 2000s, there was a sector which was considered the steerer of development and prosperity in India. A reputed sector, an emerging sector that captured the imagination of an entire generation of young, urban, English-educated people, their families, their friends. This was the information and technology enabled services sector, ITES sector, what we call very popular IT sector, or a sector like that. The emergence of this sector in India provided tremendous hope to young engineering graduates and other urban English-educated undergraduates that they could not only be part of an industry that became synonymous with the globalization experience in India, but these young impatient minds could also participating in building new ideas of modernity itself, vastly far apart from big dams or public sector industries that their forefathers had talked about. Coverage of the ITES sector in the popular press and television media carried a whiff of pride that this was India's moment. Especially if you grew up during the time, you would be bombarded from all sides to either join this sector or to talk in a very celebratory manner about this sector. Popular culture radiated the assured sweetness that this sector promised in terms of an enduringly upwardly mobile life for individuals and an enduring and certain progress, economic progress for the nation. Now, of course, this sector has done a lot of good. I'm not going to throw the sector out of the window, but at the same time, I'm not targeting this sector in my book or in my writing or in my thought. I'm targeting a certain mindset that technology is what is going to automatically or by itself usher in progress through this sector. That's one. Now, here is another unusual suspect. feeding into technological determinism. And this time I'm going to break a few hearts probably. In 2002, APJ Abdul Kalam assumed office as the President of India in great pomp and circumstance, and his affiliation to the sphere of missile technology was viewed as a shining credential, exactly at a time when India was aspiring to become a knowledge superpower. He also penned a series of books and other writings that set down the agenda for a developed India, which is supposed to happen in this wonderful year that we're going through now. Now, while due credit must be given to the late president for presenting a vision of an aspiring India at a time when there was nobody else who delivered the performance of India's dreamer in the show, with the showmanship that he did, I still strongly critique his perception of the role of technology in the agenda for India's development. In his works, technology is placed as prime mover. Now, I quote this from his writing. For the developed nation that India ought to surge by 2020. Technology dominates all walks of life. You know, if you put it bluntly, Kalam's writing stretched a unidirectional linear causation from technological change to social change and development without either considering the reverse or considering its harmony. A cursory look at the sectors, if you just look at the sectors that he listed, which would bring about social change and wealth generation, these are his own words, which would bring about social change and wealth generation, just listen to the sectors. Information and communication technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology, weather forecasting, disaster management, telemedicine, teleeducation, native language production, service, infotainment, all linked by information technology. Again, this is not to disrespect a single one of these sectors or to talk about, or to disregard their contributions. Certainly not. But it is to critique a certain mindset that there is a unidirectional movement from technology to development. So technology is supposedly, in his words, the highest wealth generator in the shortest possible period, strengthening all other structures of this nation. At best, this writing was ambitious and dreamy. At worst, it misled millions of adults and children towards technological determinism. It had no place for the role of society except as a passive, ductile recipient of technological change. Now, though it didn't create too much of a flutter in the science and technology establishments, his ideas had permeated rather deeply into the public imagination, convincing people that technology was not just a juggernaut, but now a silver bullet that would address development concerns and solve them. Now, this is a word that is used a number of times, solve. Everyone from school children to young adults to working professionals had glowing admiration, understandably, for Kalam and his writing and his outreach that is now the stuff of legend. And they had sufficiently absorbed enough of his writing to thicken the determinism broth. At a subliminal level, technology emerged as an actor through all these suspects, usual and unusual suspects. Technology emerged as an actor that improved individual and social and national well-being. By the time the 2000s arrived, technology was not just in the driver's seat holding the steering wheel. Technology became the engine and the wheels of the cars as well. Even in our era today, anything that begins with the prefix E, the letter E, implying electronic or smart, anything which begins with the prefix E immediately begins to rake up expectations in the mind of the public to solve everything with a point and shoot strategy. Most issues around development began to be aimed by digital technological interventions, you name it, in education, environment, polity, infrastructure, health, communication, you name it. Digital technological interventions were said to solve things. And the results naturally were mixed. Some were successful, of course, some were indifferent, and some were downright dangerous. If you look at issues of Aadhaar, the supply of computers to rural schools, or even online teaching during this pandemic, you can see that these are very mixed results. They're sometimes successful, sometimes indifferent, and sometimes even dangerous. You see? So, in principle, there is little wrong with the technological intervention to address a development concern. I'm a technology studies scholar. Of course, I would say that there is an important role for technology in development. And lots of things and computers and computer technology, digital technology have done wonders. There's no doubt about that. The problem was, and the problem remains, a force feeding of technological intervention, usually digital technological intervention, to socioeconomic processes, not just as a high protein supplement, but as a panacea. So the goal of spreading the technology became slowly more important than the actual development concern, as can be seen in the case of Aadhaar. The aura of technology as a solve all pervaded the development discourse in policy, making technology-led development something very normal. There was, and there still is, very little in terms of a nuanced understanding of the role of technology according to context. And that's the first time I'm using this word after a while, context. Smart things appeared everywhere, but those smart things were not for everyone. Very often people became excluded systematically when these technologies encountered them. And one of the spheres in which this has been, a lot has been written about, but very little of it being heeded, is in the area of, for example, smart cities, where smart things appear everywhere, but they're obviously not for everyone. In fact, if smart cities if cities are understood to be smart because they're inclusive, they're sustainable, and they're livable, that's a very smart city. But if cities are going to be smart because you're going to have these, gadgets and things like that pop up everywhere, if you're going to have a high technology led urbanism, if you're going to have the proliferation of high technology devices and this sort of thing, then you're very well going to marginalize a lot of people if you are concerned about them, and you're going to exclude a large number of people. So it is no wonder that the idea of smart cities has come under such a lot of academic critique and policy critique. It has come under such a lot of critique because greatly they have the potential. Smart cities have the potential to be exclusionary, and one of the drivers of that exclusion is technology. By adopting a technological determinist perspective, we end up depriving the political nature of technology. In fact, it is the very political nature of technology is that what brings about different results in different social settings, which means that we must depart from the attitude that technology is singular and it is functional. It's a functionality. The move away from this involves rectifying our tone, our tendency, and our content of the public discussion around technology, unidirectionally from the social impact of a technology to the social circumstances of a technology's development, deployment, and use. Please note the difference. This calls for a much greater interdisciplinarity in research. It calls for a far greater multiplicity in concept and method. And it also brings out the need for understanding things like power, social institutions that are indoctrinated, social structures, and these are all tightly linked to certain technologies. So what we need here is, in our understanding, is to depose technology from a prime mover to a mediator that overlaps with society, which doesn't, this sort of thinking doesn't actually reduce the actual impact of the technology. It improves, but instead it improves our fine-grained understanding of its operation and its outcome. If we wish to build a more holistic understanding of technology, we are pressed to integrate and highlight the social and cultural factors. For example, you have gender, caste, power, race. All these have to be put into our analysis of technology and development to improve our understanding of the human condition and its relationship with technology at a broader level. The social life of technologies is to be understood in a much deeper sense than simply the diffusion of those technologies in one society or the other. This is quite in contrast to the oversimplified, success-failure binary, which is too often reflected in policy. In whatever I have spoken now, I have drawn greatly from the literature. I have drawn greatly from the academic literature. Many of these ideas have been inspired a lot from the academic literature, which is replete across the book. But right at the outset of the book, I follow David Arnold's clarion call for understanding how technologies, even though they have materialized as identical artifacts across the globe, that is, a mobile phone or a laptop might look identical all over the world, but still these technologies have local uses and vernacular meanings. I proceed with the reality that technological experience is not just a metropolitan or a high-tech phenomenon, but also strongly has a subaltern element, a gendered element in an ambience which is wildly different from a corporate white-collar or sophisticated industrial setting. Let me speak for a moment about the conceptual spheres that lead us towards understanding a social context of technology. These concepts and frameworks actually form the basis, the foundational basis for my book. The first one is something called SCOT, S-C-O-T, which is the social construction of technologies. This framework has been my foremost guide in this book. This framework, what it does is that it sociologically deconstructs a technology by understanding the various social groups that are associated with that technology. It understands the broad frame or paradigm in which technological processes are set. And most important of all, it looks for how each of these social groups which are associated with the technology interpret that technology in their own way. So if you see a phone, for instance, a mobile phone, the way that every single one of us relate to the mobile phone is different. So so citing the Scott framework, there is not just one mobile phone, there are n number of mobile phones in this same device because everybody and every social group interprets it differently. That's one. The second conceptual sphere is the feminist theories of technology. These have been crucially important in provoking the idea that technologies are often gendered agendas, which are not incidental because gender is embedded in technology and technology is integral in the renegotiation of gendered power relations. Technology is a source and a consequence of these unequal gendered power relations, and these are greatly rooted in intersectionality. That's another set of frameworks. Yet another set of theoretical frameworks is, say, social capital or economic sociology as such. And this is important because economic sociology, and especially social capital, provides us conceptual avenues and tools to understand how people connect together, why people connect to each other, how people become cohesive, why do they stay apart, how do they build relationships, how do they negotiate power, and therefore in everything, how they learn and proceed in technological change, and how these become social processes. All these concepts which I've spoken of now urge for a spectrum of methodologies that range from quantitative analyses to anthropological, to ethnographic, historical, archive, and so on. And I use all these concepts and all these methods extensively in my book, in my case studies. So let me move on to my case studies now. I provide 3 case studies in this book. Each of these cases are vastly different from one another. The first one is of caste weavers in a small town setting. The second one is of Dalit communities in a peri-urban setting. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term, the peri-urban is in the outskirts of the mainstream city. And the third case is about women garbage collectors, our Paura Karmikas in metropolitan Bangalore. So quite wildly different from one another. The first case study, let's talk about the first case study. The first case study is the case of the Saliyar caste weaver cluster in Balaramapuram near Trivandrum in Kerala. Now, they produce handloom textile products. If you're familiar with the traditional and pretty well-known Kerala sari, the white sari with the gold border, everyone has seen it. This community, the Saliyar community in Balaramapuram, were the ones who were at the foremost of that industry 100 years ago, and for most of the century, they were dominant. And now they're in the doldrums. Not now, over the last 25 to 30 years, they've been in the doldrums. How did that happen? Now, this study demonstrates an interesting form of technological change. Here, the technology is constant, handloom is constant. But at the same time, there is a certain amount of learning that happens, a certain amount of process innovation that happens not by R&D, not by your research and development, not by owner's manuals, not by formal training. This learning and technological change happens through informal information sharing among people within their social networks over there. That is, the networks among people, very informal networks among people, become channels through which a lot of technological information flows. Lessons drawn from this Saliyar cluster show how thickly cohesive networks resting on their social capital have broken their dominance, now both economically and technologically. I use network analysis here, social network analysis. I use quantitative social network analysis as well as historical qualitative network analysis. And by undertaking a network analysis of the Saliyar cluster, I demonstrate that, first of all their economic relations, or almost all their economic relations, are actually their social relations. That is, it's mostly their friends and relatives. These are their business networks, to put it in a nutshell. To put it in a simple word, all their business networks are basically their friends and relatives. This is social embeddedness, which is the term that we use to describe how economic activities and economic behavior has sociological foundations. So one thing is that The second thing is that they greatly exhibit homophily. Homophily is the preference for one's own. You like to network with people of your own caste, your own language, your own gender, your own whatever, your own economic strata. It's called homophily. Birds of a feather flock together, So when I undertook a network study of the Saliar cluster, I showed that it is not only social embeddedness, but in its combination with homophily, that was detrimental. See, while there are a number of cases in the Indian handloom industry showing a healthy relationship between community cohesion and technological progress, in the case of the Saliars, the relationship has actually been unhealthy because it has been too intense. To understand why, I even look at the inherited nature of these Saliar networks and the centrality of community social capital. So I show here in this study how complex social relations influence technological progress in this cluster. Let's go to the next study. The second study in this book presents a fresh perspective on the relationship between digital communication technologies and historically disadvantaged castes such as Dalits. In simple words, how has the engagement of Dalit communities in peri-urban Bangalore, how has their engagement been with the mobile phone revolution? As it, the study deepens the understanding of this in the lives and livelihoods of these historically deprived castes. It is set in peri-urban Bangalore, in Electronic City, which is supposed to be India's Silicon Valley, that region. I primarily use oral histories as a method, a modification of that. And I ask whether mobile phone technologies have bypassed these Dalit communities, whether they have been insufficiently harnessed by these Dalit communities to overcome their historical deprivation, or whether they have even assisted in reinforcing the exclusion of these groups. That is, have mobile phones and ICTs actually made them even more excluded? I use, as I said, a different form of oral histories, as well as focus group discussions and detailed long form interviews to answer why has the relationship between Dalit communities and mobile phones been not successful, and in some cases, partly successful, in some cases, reasonably successful. The reason why, for the most part, in these Dalit communities, this has come about is because of three things. Firstly, the fact that caste and caste discrimination actually is durable, alive, and kicking in peri-urban and metropolitan India. It is something which conveniently a lot of policy overlooks, denies, consciously, unconsciously, whatever. It is something that really doesn't feature as strongly as it should. The second reason why these Dalit communities haven't fared so well as far as the mobile phone communication, as far as mobile phone technology goes, compared to the other dominant communities in the area, the reason is also because of how they socially construct the usage of the phone. Okay, and this is a theoretical reason. The third reason why things have been a little dismal for these Dalit communities in that area in their engagement with mobile phones is because of a myopia in the understanding of digital divide in the Indian policy. Now, how usually digital divide is understood is whether you have or you have not. You have the device or you do not have the device. You have internet connection or you do not have internet connection. But I use Jack Linchman Q's term, the information have less. This is a very interesting term. The information have less are people who have the device, and hence the digital divide doesn't exist for them. They are bridged, the digital divide is bridged. They are people who have the device. They may even have internet connection, but they lack the effective participation in the digital revolution. They're simply passive consumers of digital technologies, and they're on the margins. They're highly excluded, and they participate in the digital experience purely as casual consumers of entertainment or communication. Society reproduces its cleavages in the technology that it uses. We have to rethink the digital divide as not simply a have or have not binary, but as a multi-dimensional spectrum, just like caste itself is a spectrum of inequality and forced deprivation. While these Dalit communities in peri-urban Bangalore have had a very dismal relationship, the Dalit entrepreneurs that I had spoken to had a very positive relationship, and the Dalit social activists that I had spoken to had also a mixed positive and negative engagement with this. So you see, we have to reassess when we think about, technology as ameliorating things or pushing forward progress, we have to rethink on how this works actually on the ground. The third and the final case study in this book is about women garbage collection workers or Paura Karmikas in metropolitan Bangalore city. We see them every morning if you live here. Undertaken with two other co-researchers. Now, this is not my study alone. I have undertaken it with two other co-researchers. One of the co-researchers is Dr. Neeti, who is a faculty at IIHS. She is associated with the Urban Employment and Labor. The other co-researcher in this study is an old student of Neeti's and mine. When both of us were in Azim Premji University, she was a student of the development program there. Saloni Mundra, who is now with the Ajivika Bureau in Udaipur. So the three of us conducted the study, and we assert in this study that gender stands at the cornerstone of the everyday work experiences as well as the everyday technological experiences of these Paura Karmikas. The politics of informality and the politics of technological experience are both rooted in the notions of gender. For these garbage collection workers, who are actually a subaltern, informal, feminized workforce, while the work experience, their everyday work experience, is the outcome of a concoction between informality, caste, and gender. Their encounter with the new technology, that is the biometric technology, we all know that, the biometric technology to mark their attendance, their encounter with the biometric technology has just reflected and reproduced these informal labor experiences, and these technological experiences of the Paura Karmikas with their biometric attendance marker, these experiences have simply seated themselves in the existing highly unequal socio-political ambience of these workers. So our analysis in this book brings together traditions from labor informality and the feminist politics of technology and places gender as a centerpiece to intertwine them, forming a cooperative analysis of technology and informality, and bringing about these multiple social variables that have made the deeply downgraded footing for these informal workers. So through these case studies, we realize a couple of things. The Saliyars declined because they were too cohesive. The Dalit communities majorly lost out on the mobile phone revolution because a convergence of things had put stress on them. And the Paura Karmikas experienced a distressing engagement with biometric technologies because they were informal women workers. In each of these cases, the technological experiences and the outcomes materialized on account of the underlying sociological structure and the dynamics. So throughout these studies, I have urged for the necessity to observe, analyze, and assess technology as a sociological process. So let me now wrap up. So throughout, I have argued how an interplay of socio-political factors can generate unexpected or sometimes imperceptible technological outcomes. I have attempted to present a much broader perspective on technological experience and processes in this book as embedded in sociological underpinnings, and it's in vast contrast to the stunted perspective of the general mainstream approach towards innovation in India. I have sought in this book to project innovation and learning as inclusive processes which are very important while crafting development policy. Let me spend the last 1 or 2 minutes of my talk by reading out from my book. As I told you, the book is not with me here, so I'll have to read out from the manuscript that I have on my screen. And if I may read out and wrap up my talk. Technology has always been an integral part of being human. Archaeological evidence of sewing needles, tens of thousands of years old, experiments in metallurgy over thousands of years, the journey of print over the last few hundred years, and developments around energy over the last couple of decades, they have all characterized each age in human history. We have always been in a technological era as humans. There's nothing special about today's era. Except that the clamor of the messianic role of technology as an autonomous chauffeur of development and a magical solution that has been getting noisy. Societies and technologies have always evolved together in our history and therefore need to be analyzed together. To understand society, we have to understand technology and vice versa. When one transforms, so does the other. If certain attributes within society are inelastic, the technological experience associated with that society will also reflect those attitudes. For this reason, we must not fall to expecting technological change to assuredly pilot in development, whether as temples in the form of big dams or compact, sleek solutions as mobile phones. Doesn't work that way. Not just for weavers or historically depressed communities or garbage sweepers, not just them. Every individual in one's relationship with technology, all of us are wading through a socio-technological experience while engaging with that technology. We need to reconfigure our understanding and expectations around technological change, since it does not have an autarkic existence or an autonomous operation outside of society. We mold ourselves around the technologies we create, but much more so, our technologies are what we are. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Anand. It's really nice how you've been able to, walk us through what the world of the book is, despite not being able to have it and hold it and show it to us. And I really appreciate, like I said in the beginning, the kind of dense ethnographic bits of the decentralized experiences of technology that you're trying to show to us. And you started your talk by talking about like the slavish role that development and society have to technology, and you ended by saying, we've always existed with technology. And I want just to begin our discussion off, as questions are coming in from the audience, and we will take them in a few minutes, to think about, what the city is as a unit in the flux of these forces, right? Because you've taken three very different kinds of urban sites to do to root your empirical studies. You have a small town, you have a peri-urban setting, and you have a metropolitan setting. And one of the main offerings of cities or metropolitan regions is their proclivity for technological innovation and the clustering of imagination and creation, and as much for employment that supports the endeavors of these industries and the kind of industries they form. So can you help us reflect on what the urbanisms or urban culture of these different sized urban units have to do with the kind of insights you had about the way technology and society interacts and impacts? You're on mute, Anand.
Oh, okay. I think I should be audible now. All right. When I chose these cases, if I can start from there, whether it was the Salyar cluster, Weaver cluster, or the Dalit communities in peri-urban Bangalore, or the Paurakarmikas, actually these were done at three completely different points of time. The Salyar cluster the cluster study was done many years ago when we were living in Trivandrum, and I was conducting most of my field work for my doctoral work over there. The Dalit communities and in peri-urban Bangalore, the inspiration for that came actually strangely while I was working at Azim Premji University, and we had to cross a large number of Dalit settlements on our ways. And the Paurakarmika study was inspired mainly by the other two co-researchers I had said, Neeti as well as Saloni. But the interesting thing was that what was the thread that ran through all of them, like you correctly said, that the thread of the urban runs through all of them, despite the fact that it was not intended originally that way. And that's something I must confess right now to everyone listening here, that the way this book was constructed was by understanding through these studies, among many other studies that I have done on technology and society, these three particular studies brought together a lot of lessons for us, which I spoke about all this while. Now, let's talk about the urban a bit, if I may just, think loudly, if I may say. See, the urban economy is where a Pandora's box gets thrown up. So many studies in academics and so many films also demonstrate the urban experience as something very complex, not only in terms of its agglomerative potential, but also in terms of the new equations around social capital in urban settings, the new challenges of housing, new challenges of infrastructure, new issues of climate that people have to cope up, most of all with urban informal labor. So even whether you're a migrant or whether you're an incumbent, the wide spectrum of urban multiculturality also opens up to you. Now, why I'm saying all this is because just like the urban has its own politics and sociology, there is a politics and sociology of the urban of its own. So this politics and sociology of the urban becomes a crucible for new forms of learning and innovation and technological change also. Now, if I may just take a second to talk about my book prior to this, about innovation, social networks, and development. There, I spoke about something called defensive innovation, collective invention, low-tech learning, social capital. I've brought it in this book also, where we see that a lot of the technological experiences in urban settings do not take place in the conventional way that we think. They're in a very unconventional way. Informal economy is actually where, and it'll be quite amusing to many of you that I'm using this word now. Informal economy, informal urban economy is also where jugaad happens. Makeshift innovations to solve immediate problems. Jugaad happens. In fact, that's a slightly unfair definition of jugaad I've given. We can laugh enough about jugaad, but we cannot disrespect it, The informal economy is most of the urban economy, and therefore that's where most of the technological learning activity happens. But at the same time, the urban has its own special and often sophisticated breed and flavor of marginalization and exclusion. For example, in rural areas or in more remote areas, you would have very harsh temple restrictions for Dalits, and you would have you would have routine burning of huts and produce and things like that. But in urban areas, from whatever I've studied and whatever the people whom I had spoken to in these Dalit colonies said, that in urban areas there is a silent segregation of housing. That's one way it works. And they said that while in the old days molten lead was recommended to be poured into the ears of Dalit community, of Dalit individuals who by chance listened to the scriptures. Today, you of course don't probably have lead being poured in, but at the same time, they say that the people whom I spoke to there said that it's very simple. The dominant communities there do not include us into the credit networks. They don't include us into the business networks. They don't pass contact details. They don't allow us to progress. They do not provide us any leads. They don't do that. Now they don't. Now the communities there don't also have their own social capital and their financial capital because of the extreme amount of historical deprivation that's been there. It is very difficult for things to start up on their own, although there have been some wonderful success stories also that I've seen. The urban brings about a full palette of these complications, whether it is the possible, the possibilities, the marginalization. A lot of these things are possible in the urban. So urbanism in its complicated glory is the same crucible in which technological learning also finds birth in it. So that's. I mean, if I've not rambled on, this is what my immediate thoughts are about this.
Yeah. No, so actually just picking up from that, because you brought out the relationship between informality and the urban itself in Indian cities, and a lot of my work does kind of look at that interplay, right? So I look at how platform technologies like Uber, Swiggy, etc. Meld with the forces of the informal economy, how they react to them. How does Ola cabs recruit drivers, offer them work, or how do collectives form or not form, given the fact that this is the political economy that we're dealing with. And like you said, in your studies also, the kind of groups you looked at, informality scores, how people are living, the infrastructures that they're making, their housing, the terms of their employment. So can you help us understand maybe can you help us reflect on the contemporary moment of where, the technological narrative is very much focused now on platforms and this kind of technology we're seeing around us. So, how do we read the technological determinism and the political economy of that with the kind of programs, policy initiatives, and market endeavors that seem to have a very clear intention with and doing something to the informal economy, right? To shake it, to move it, to shape it. So how do you read those changes that we're seeing now, given that we're also in this pandemic moment? So how do you read the changes, with the digitization of the kirana or the fintech developments that are trying to get people into more banking systems? How do you understand these contemporary kind of examples?
Well, interestingly, I might end up citing some of your own work when I say this. You might listen to some of your own work when I'm speaking. But the way I look at it greatly is that although of course it's really laudable that a lot of startups and a lot of a lot of avenues for gig economy and platform economy have opened up and have indeed helped people to get back on their feet. That is true. I don't ever disregard that. And it has helped a lot of people, especially distressed migrants from rural areas immediately around Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. When they've come here, they've been able to at least get back on their feet financially because of these opportunities. At the same time, we must be very careful in touting the gig economy or the platform economy as some sort of the future of not only the future of work, but also the future of amelioration. You see, that is why I'm saying this with such a grand word as amelioration, is because if we look around in common conversations, we hear so often that, oh, this is, the way that these people, to use it in that way, the way we other them so easily, the way that all these people who have come from such difficult circumstances, this is the path ahead for them. This is how they are going to urbanize. This is how they're going to meet new technologies from all their old archaic institutions that they've come from. Sorry, no. I believe that while those things are all factually true, unfortunately, we're entirely missing out the picture of inequality here. Not just economic inequality, the technological inequality also. If, for instance, these platform economies and these opportunities help them to also absorb some of the technologies and bring out their own bring out their own entrepreneurial skills, that's wonderful. But no, these economies, these platform economies and gig jobs, if I can call them that, and I know it's a very shabby word I'm using, but these kind of gig jobs, they're just going to keep them in that same, in that same little exclusionary sphere from, one end to the other. Maybe not frying pan to fire, but frying pan to an urban frying pan, where inequalities remain, structures remain, all this remains. In fact, another thing that I've written in this book is the fact that especially the affluent classes, especially the urban elite, and even if not the urban elite, even the urban middle classes and the urban lower middle classes, although they join in the celebration when some Ola driver's son becomes an IIHS, or when some Swiggy delivery boy's daughter cracks the SSLC and gets, we hear of all this. There are all those celebratory conversations at that time, but nobody wants to dismantle and reorient the structures that got them there in the first place. So I may be moving a little towards political economy and things like that, but they're closely related with technology, because technology is not ameliorating them. It is just helping them get back on their feet for the time being. Entrepreneurial and entrepreneurial possibilities have to be improved, and at the same time, so basic structures also have to be improved as far as the workers of the gig and platform economics go.
That's really true and fair, and I think this kind of often because the discourse on the future of work and the futures of this technology are so kind of really powerful in the kind of consumer class that runs a lot of the market forces in our country. I think this looking at technological inequality is quite difficult, especially when you see it happening around the people in your everyday life. There's a part of that sociological imagination of your everyday life that you don't seem to have because it's too close to your life to reflect on it. So, and that's kind of how I try to introduce this evening also, to say that every one of us listening should kind of have the toolkit in our minds to start to understand this, right? Because it's no longer in the realm of the sociologists or the STS scholars to do this, because now all of us kind of have our consumer power is actually what's driving a lot of that. So actually, can you help us understand what toolkits that you use to actually understand this? Like, what are the ways, and what are some of the other ways that you could have chosen that maybe are incorrect, or you won't be able to actually see the technological inequalities or see how these outcomes are being formed, and kind of give us an approach to what methods look like and how we can actually use them in our everyday life.
So although I have great respect for mainstream methods to understand technological innovation, I do not at all disrespect them. At the same time, I find them very limited. Now, if you look at the understanding of the Salier community cluster, now there have been several mainstream economic studies on them, industry analyses, macroeconomic analysis, policy analyses, and all of them have actually, I mean, I respect every one of them. I've cited many of them in my works. But at the same time, to understand what really went wrong, we had to go much below the surface and look at how people connect with one another. And that's why I use social network analysis. It's a very powerful tool. Unfortunately, of course, I could spend an entire hour talking on social network analysis because it is, it really shows at such a granular level. You can really pick out exactly at a cellular level what went wrong. And that's exactly what it allowed me to do. Also, if you look at historical archival analysis, which I also used for the Salier community, I also understood that this is not an inevitable thing. In fact, I must say that I must say it at this point of time, with the dismantling of these boards, the handicraft board, the handloom board, with the dismantling of these, and the powerloom board, with the dismantling of these boards, learn from history that it has not always been bad. Even during the British era, it has been prosperous. It has gained a certain level of prosperity, maybe not as great as it was prior to the British Raj, but even during the British Raj in Western India, certain parts of the handloom industry were actually quite prosperous because of their social cohesion, because they were so welcoming to technological change as a society. The social relations are what helped them bring technological change. Works by both Tirthankar Roy as well as Douglas Haynes provides that greatly. In fact, even today, you have the work of Annapurna Mamedipudi and Beaver Baika, who have talked a lot about socio-technology in handloom. So social network analysis, even though these other authors have said have not worked on that, social network analysis digs out exactly what these people have been writing out so correctly. The second thing, the Dalit community is, in fact, I realized by talking to my former colleague, Anil Sethi, a historian, at a very casual meeting, he spoke to me just generally about the power of this thing called oral histories, which for me as an economics graduate was new. Many people probably in this discussion room would, say that, this is nothing new. But for me as an economics, a person with an economics background, it was brand new, and I found this very fascinating. And I realized that the only way you're going to understand the technological experience of these subaltern communities is to understand their life histories with this technology. So just like David Arnold said, this technology had a vernacular and a local meaning for these Dalit communities. And the only way I'm going to find that out is by asking them a long history of how this is. So that way, the oral histories approach was very important. The same case with the Paurakarmikas also. It was mainly qualitative, mainly ethnographic, mainly, I know I'm using the word ethnography in such a loose way, and I did not do justice to the actual approach of the actual method of ethnography, but you draw from ethnographic approaches to understand this. So the kind of toolkits that I used, including, of course, when you borrow from the feminist theories of technology, it tells you that one has to look at technology in a gendered way, because many artifacts that you see around are gendered. In fact, one of the things I used to speak in my class is, if you take the Enfield motorcycle that everybody goes around with, masculinity, like all over the place, and that's not that shouldn't be the case, but then it exudes so much bravado, it exudes so much masculinity. You can see that artifact is so gendered. The same case with whether it is a knitting needle or whatever it is, there's so much gender in it, and this helped me, along with the social construction of technologies, that method, to find out how each social group looks at a technology. So the Dalit households that I spoke to looked at it in a certain way. The women in the Dalit households looked at it in a certain way. The elderly people looked at it in a certain way. The Dalit entrepreneurs who are part of the Dalit Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, DICCI, they looked at it in a certain way. The Dalit political activists like Cynthia Stephen, whom I had spoken to, looked at it in a completely different way. So the social construction of technologies and the feminist approaches teach you how to, or rather guide you, how to look at these technologies in different ways, and therefore you immediately need different methodologies and not your conventional methodologies.
Thank you very much for that. I think really useful for everyone listening in to actually start to bifurcate all these different people for the different identities they have when they start to look at these things. So I'm just going to start reading out some questions that we have from the audience. I'm sorry if I'm not calling your name out, but I read your question out. But we had a question on, which I think follows really nicely from our discussion, which is what are your thoughts on participatory technologies? Will this have a potential for more inclusive development and governance?
Oh, I wish this were in person, because I'm actually not sure what is meant by participatory technologies. Do you know? I'm not fully clear on what this meant, although it does seem like an important question.
Okay, so we can come back to it. Maybe the person who asked can just
if they could
give a
clarify,
comment.
Yeah.
We can understand that. So we have another question, which is a role of technology is also to solve problems that people who can pay. Do you think a greater participation of the state to push technology to solve more widespread problems is needed?
Okay, that's a rather strange question, because in fact, I'm going to shoot down the word solve in the first place. That's something that we've been talking about for all this while. But yes, technology does have an important role in it. And the best way to understand that role is to understand local specific contexts, to understand sociological factors and how this technology is going to be absorbed in society, and how this is going to be utilized also. Now, let me give you an example from history, very recent history. I would say the early 1990s, which is written quite nicely in the work of Yevgeny Morozov, who spoke a lot about technological solutionism. He writes quite interestingly that and this is actually a well-known case, that that the radio was a technology that spread quite effortlessly in Rwanda, the country Rwanda. And this is the same technology that was used by the oppressor community to relay out messages as to where their victims were. So you had actual radio broadcasts about, there are that community is in that village, that community is in that village, and all these violent attackers would go there. And this was all broadcast on the radio. Now, if you're going to, if government is going to just say, okay, let's have radio everywhere, that's good. We must have radio everywhere. But if you're going to ignore the fact that this radio can be used for this, then you have a problem. Let me come to an example closer to home. And this is something which the political activists I had spoken to had said, that while on the one hand, we can have far more political mobilization with something as simple as WhatsApp, which we all know very well now, how we can, political mobilization is so much easier this way. At the same time, there was this case where this individual from a lower caste community went fishing in a lake well outside of Bangalore, and immediately somebody from the dominant caste found out, WhatsApped his friends, and got together. Now, the person who I was speaking to said that had there not been mobile phones, this poor fellow would have been fishing, which is what has been happening for a long time now. You see, so we must be very, very careful when we say, can government solve or address development issues with technology? We must be extremely careful. It's not always bad news. Sometimes you can have, unintended good, positive outcomes also. The point here is it's unintended, unanticipatable, uncertain. And we do that by understanding the social contexts.
I actually have a follow-up question to that myself, which I think will be nice for the audience to also hear. That, can you just very briefly, because I know you do this in the introduction of your book, can you just take us through kind of what the state's framing of technology has been towards the development of it? And I know that's like a very, very vast question to ask you. But I think just to, just very briefly to explain, has there been changes? Where are we at now?
Well, two things have changed. One is the form, and the other one is the intensity. The form has changed because a long time ago it was big dams. A long time ago it was, all these other large-scale technologies. That was the form. And today the form is Aadhaar. The form is, E things, as I said, everything with E. Now, big dams, of course, have some benefits, some benefits, and E and Aadhaar also have some benefits, certainly more than big dams. So the form has changed. But the idea that these things are going to propel us, that idea has not changed. It reached a sort of crescendo in the 90s and 2000s when the IIHS sector came on board, and If you look at the plan document, that is the 5-year plans, you can see IT. Actually, what they meant was ITES, but this sector, you can see it being bombarded through everywhere. Every single sector in the economy, from agriculture to education, was supposed to use IT. Although, of course, there is some grain of benefit in that. At the same time, it was touted as some sort of a solution, a magic pill. The intensity has also increased because of the kind of quick fix attitudes we have developed towards a technology. For instance, you take even what's happening now. If we had this talk 6 months ago, I would not be talking about online teaching, but just look at what's happening now. That is the kind of solutionist mindset that we've had, that okay, fine, we can't do, let's do online teaching for these children. Then you realize a little later, it takes you a little while to realize that not everybody has those gadgets. Then you say, okay, fine, let's supply those gadgets everywhere. Not that this has happened, but I'm saying that, okay, let's supply the gadgets. Once you supply the gadgets, you've realized that, oh dear, everybody doesn't have equal internet connection. And then you realize that, oh dear, if there's only one gadget in the house, it will most probably be taken by the fittest male in the house, if I can use that term. So there's so many complications with this. And in that way, you see, the intensity as well as the form of this has changed, but the same kind of problematic thinking does remain in policy throughout, whether it is policy of the 5-year plans in the 1950s or today's plan for artificial intelligence. The problem, there's a thread of a problem running through.
So Ashish would ask the question on participatory technologies, has written in with a little bit more detail. So I'll just read that out. By participatory technologies, I mean like citizen design science. So design solutions which include citizens to the planning and governance processes by using ICT tech apps to create a more responsive environment. So his question was, is there hope in that?
Absolutely, there's a lot of hope in including, people, common people, if that's what he means. And I must actually, I've been a little unfair so far to policy. The very recent Science Technology Policy 2020, which is being formulated, for the very first time in this kind of a breadth and intensity, the Department of Science and Technology, in its Facebook page and otherwise, has called for a lot of proposals, not formal proposals, but ideas, a lot of visions. Vision 2040 is what they say. A lot of visions and things like that from anyone. You could be anyone. You need not be a graduate with a technology studies major. You could be anyone. So anyone can send in their ideas, and these would be duly credited. So it is important that we do engage common people. But then again, I want to slightly drift to a different field of study, which is very much associated with what we talk today. Who are your citizens? I'm not questioning this, the person who asked the question, but I'm posing it as a general question. Who are your citizens? Are your citizens only those who can respond with those apps? In that way, you've got a very limited citizenry. Are your citizens those who can articulate it? Then again, you've got a limited citizenry. What are the kind of citizens that you've asked? Have you thought about? Again, let me come back to smart cities. Have you, when you hold consultations, public consultations about smart cities, do you talk to marginalized people? Do you talk to transgender individuals? Do you talk to the homeless? Do you talk to migrants? Do you talk to people? So we must, as much as the idea of citizen participation in technological policy is very important, I think the core problem there is if we have a limited idea of what citizen is, we must expand that. Otherwise, it is meaningless.
And actually, Sili's question from Facebook takes off from that. And they've written that there are many tech organizations working on getting the next billion users in India online. Yes. What should be the goals of such efforts, apart from just connecting them online, such that new users actually benefit from this change, given the socio-economic background of these users? So what should their intentions be? What should their goals be?
It's important that they are online. As I've said, even throughout my talk, I don't, I'm after all a technology studies scholar, and I do not throw out technology from the window. They should come online. It is, in one way, it is heartening to see the more and more people coming online. But what is disheartening is that many of them come online to watch the latest, music video from somewhere. I mean, do watch it for entertainment, but that's not the only thing that your mobile phone is meant for. It's not meant only for passing on lewd forwards to one another and things like that. I mean, this is, I'm talking from my field work, I'm talking from that. This is not meant only for that. As much as it is important to get them online, it is as important to also make them aware of what they can do online. Otherwise, what is going to happen is you and me, Aditi, are going to use our mobile phones to check where the latest conference is, where the latest funding is, where the latest, what the latest book is. We're going to use it for that. And the people right down under are probably just going to use it for, like I said, watching movie songs and nothing else. That's the only purpose this is. They must be made aware, and of course there's a long way to go for that, but they must be made aware of how this can be used to better their socioeconomic situation. It's extremely important. For example, as far as safety of women inside households goes, maybe there could be, I'm just throwing this up, maybe there could be an app that, helps signal an SOS or something like that. Anything, this was just at the tip of my tongue. Anything like that. It's very important to show how to channelize this for the good, as much as it is important to get everybody online.
So we have another question from the chat. So similar to claims like technology causes an improvement in learning or technology causes an improvement in social connectivity, which might be seen as techno-optimist claims arising from a technological determinist view, do you think that claims like technology causes violent behavior or the fears expressed by Gandhi about technology, which might be called as techno-pessimist claims, also arise from the same technological determinism? Aren't these claims similar in their tendency of imagining change, whether positive or negative, as flowing from technology into society?
I'll pick up from Gandhi. I think that's a very interesting thing to bring up. And although I've mentioned this in one or two lines in my book, yes, Gandhi's pessimism did emerge. And I must say that's a very well-reflected question. That question comes from a good amount of reflection. That yes, one can say that Gandhi's pessimism about such technologies were pretty much based on determinism. But where I would critique Gandhi's approach, and I'm not a scholar of Gandhi, so I don't know whether to call it a Gandhian approach, but certainly the man, Gandhi's approach to technology was pessimistic to some extent justifiably, but probably also because his idea of what technology is was possibly myopic. In fact, if one of the ways in which Gandhian thought has spread like wildfire all over the world, and the civil rights movement in the United States or in so many other places, the Gandhian thought has influenced so much, is because of a technology called print. It's because of a technology called radio. So if there were an opportunity to expand the view of expand Gandhi's view of what technology is, possibly this pessimism would not exist. His pessimism probably came from the idea, and as I said, there is a grain of truth in it, the idea that big technology is going to compromise upon the welfare of the most marginalized, the welfare of the rural, the welfare of the underclass. There is a great amount of truth in that, not just a grain of truth, I'll change my words. There's a great amount of truth in that. But at the same time, this sort of anti-technology stance, which he is accused of, I'll say that carefully, that he's accused of might be because of a very myopic understanding of what technology even is. That's the thing. There was a question, part of the question just before the sentence, could you repeat that? Just before this line on Gandhi, it's a very valid one.
So they said, do you think that the technological optimism and pessimism comes from the same technological determinist view? So do you think that claims like technology causes violent behavior or fear Gandhi can also be called?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll disconnect it from the Gandhi point, but the technology as a platform for violent behavior is absolutely right. But I'm going to again draw from the literature, which said that when the Arab Spring happened about a decade ago, a lot of people and a lot of commentators immediately, including right up to the New York Times and commentators like that, said that, oh, this is a technology-led revolution, the first of its kind, unlike what happened in France in the 1700s and what happened in India. This is a technology-led revolution, simply because everybody was on Twitter. Now, there was a lot of criticism about that, not just critique, a lot of criticism. And the fundamental point of this criticism was that they are revolutionary. They are going to get their idea through. They are, in the spirit of revolution, technology or no technology, they're going to get their way. So they said that technology was only a medium through which the information about the revolution was put up, which is true, but it cannot be a technological revolution. Now, let me bring this to the point that was asked over here about violent behavior. A violent person will remain violent without the technology. A violent person will find new ways to be violent with this technology. And by violent, of course, it need not be only physical violence. The person who is, who passes around, say, covertly taken photographs of women unawares, of children, of things like that. The intentions were always there. The person would have enjoyed this sort of voyeurism or this perverted voyeurism in a different way earlier. Now this device is there. So it just puts the violent person, it just puts the abusive person on a different platform. And one last thing, if I may say, is that one of the things that I also used to teach is that, as far as the hold of that families have on their daughters' lives go, I used to say that when young women used to go out and study outside of their hometown, it was a little easier before the mobile phone came in, because now with the mobile phone, their families can have far greater control on them. And that is also, even if it is not violence, it is a form of control. It is a form of patriarchy. So indeed, like how the person who asked the question says, I'll expand it beyond violence, and I'll say that patriarchy, violence, perversion, revolution, all these will very well work without technology. Technology only gives them a new platform.
Thank you for that. So we have a last question that I'm just going to read out, and then we can start to wrap up. So the question is, with respect to your case study of the use of cell phones amongst the Dalit communities in peri-urban Bangalore, did you observe that the ICT or cell phones, were they ever marketed to the marginalized communities as a tool for inclusion or development? If not, can one claim that ICT's limited use for inclusion or development for marginalized communities is merely incidental and not intentional? They have a second part to their question, which is that how would you reflect on the language of technology produced, designed, marketed, as it affects its usage, considering the diverse power structures of languages within the sites you have studied?
Yeah. So I'll probably combine the two questions, combine the two parts of the question. No, they were not advertised to these communities as things that would marginalize them. Never. They were not picked up by individuals in these communities as, oh, now I have a phone, I'm going to be far better off than my father was. It's not going to happen. It did not happen that way. I draw a certain, a huge yawning distance between the experiences of these communities with the ICTs and what policy right on top talks about. Okay, never the advertisers, the marketers, and the producers of these technologies. They never promised. I mean, no service provider or person or manufacturer ever talks about these things. Naturally, they're not probably expected to, but the policy does talk about it. If you look at the policy very fine-grained, in a very fine-grained reading, and not just the Indian policy, but the international policies on the benefits of ICTs, as much as they're intended very positively, at the same time, I can say that there's a lot of solutionists writing on them that a lot of poor will be included almost automatically if they are given these devices. That's the language and the tenor. Now, in the first chapter of my book, I think I even bring out quotations from these policy documents to reflect that. So that's one thing. The second part of the question, again, my memory falls short. The second part of the question, sorry, could I have it again?
How would you reflect on the language of technology, so that's produced, designed, marketed, affects its usage? So looking at the diverse power structures of language in the sites you study.
Very much, very much. In fact, we only know that if you walk into a shop which sells a lot of digital technologies, not just mobile phones, whether it's laptops, TVs, or whatever, they want to sell them obviously for gaining market share and for profit and for their shareholders and all that. So naturally, they will appeal to consumers on the basis of, well, everything else except genuine development consents. No service provider will, no telephone manufacturer will say that if you buy this, you can access your land records faster. It will never say that. But it's if you buy this, you have a nice HD screen with all these wonderful colors. I won't accuse them at all, because it is not within their sphere to engage with those things. That's why I have never, in my entire book, as well as in my research throughout, I have never pointed fingers at, say, manufacturers and service providers. I have pointed fingers at policy, at popular culture, state, public conversations, media, commentators, and of course academics. I've pointed fingers at all of them. So it is the yawning difference between what they intend and what really happens that I have seen in these communities during my field work.
Thank you for that. So I think we have asked all the questions that have come in. So I'm just going to take a minute and wrap up. And I think I just want to wrap this entire evening up with the two words you used kind of early on, which is to actually be mindful that technology isn't the prime mover, but it's a mediator, right? That it is embedded in many parts of how we behave and how we think. And so reflecting on those is actually the most key part of figuring out what technology will bring to us and what not. And I think that's a really nice takeaway and just thought for everyone to keep in their minds as we imbibe more digital technologies in and after the pandemic. So thank you so much for your talk. Congratulations on your new book, and I hope it'll be in your hands very soon in print. Thank you to everyone for coming, and I'm just going to hand back over to Tanvi.
Yeah, thank you, Anant and Aditi, for that wonderful session. And Anant, I think we're also hoping to get a copy for our IIHS library soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It was nice to see such a great turnout for Anant's talk. And we'll have more such... Sorry?
On a technological platform. I must
yes.
add, sheepishly,
yes.
I must add that at the end. It's a sort of a very embarrassing thing for me to say this, but yes, this technology is what helped us all come together.
That's true. That's true. So a recording of this session will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. And we'll have more such sessions and talks lined up. So I would request all of you to just be updated with all our social media platforms, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and follow our website as well for more information. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Anant and Aditi, for that really wonderful discussion. So good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.